Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tembegile Felicia Makubele, and I am the host for the Are We Transforming? Today, we have a dynamic person who's going to talk to us about a very sensitive topic, which most people wouldn't really want to talk about. And I wouldn't introduce it to you because I believe it will be nice for him to talk to it. But his name is Thabiso Mongane. So welcome, and we're going to have a great time. You are allowed to participate. We're going to give him 30 minutes to just talk about the topic, and then we start engaging after that. Welcome, Thabiso, and thank you so very much for making time and agreeing to come and engage with us at Are We Transforming? This is a platform where we allow different types of people to come and engage with us, to come and share their views, and also solutions on how things can be improved, not only in South Africa, but also in Africa. So we've invited people across different spectrum. We believe that as they join, they will be able to participate. But those who are going to also watch, I believe they are going to learn quite a lot from this. So welcome, and I'll request you to introduce yourself so that you can do justice to who you are and giving people the clear indication of exactly who you are. So I'll hand over to you and we'll talk after 30 minutes.
Mam Tembi, thank you so much. And I think that this platform is really just the basis of how you actually get the conversation back in people's homes. I think that dialogue is one of the things that we've actually lost, and that's one of the things that really just is evident in how violence becomes the first point of departure when we do have disagreements in this country. But you know, as a point of departure into who I am, my name is Thabiso Mongane. I am I'm many things. I'm a youth activist. I am a social entrepreneur. I think I'm a writer. I'm very poetic too. I love to actually write poetry. I'm a South African. I'm a South African that's actually aspirational, that believes in the potential that this country could actually fulfill if things are done in a in a way that is for the greater cause of the South African people. The topic today was really just stemming from a discussion that was being held on LinkedIn. And I think that you actually caught wind of it as we were actually having that whole discussion. And the whole point of it was to really emphasize the fact that on a barometer of really measuring change, how far we as South Africa, how far we as Africa, in terms of actually, achieving the aspirations of the transformation agenda. And I'm someone who's quite honest and sincere in the way I actually just posture my thoughts. And I think that what I had really intended to really do when I did actually make the comment that is subject of this, this discussion that we're having, is I really wanted to actually just cast some truths to some of the I think the lies, some of the the parading, and some of the pageantry that has actually come with the transformation agenda in Africa and in South Africa, to be specific. Now, the truth of the matter, and this is just compounded by things that you and I and everyone else who's particularly looking and watching this particular session, the truth of the matter is that things are not transforming quick enough. Things are not transforming on a wayward trajectory. And how we know this is that we can actually see it everywhere around us. If you look around, we've finally gotten to the point where the fulcrum of unemployment has reached its pinnacle. Youth unemployment has reached, proportions of and magnitudes of major proportions. And the real reason is the fact that we just got caught up in that lie, that transformation agenda lie. And here we are right now dealing with 74% of young people who are actually unemployed. And the most painful attribute about this is the fact that these 74% of young people who are unemployed in this country don't have much that they can actually do about their employment status. And I think that for me was the most damning thing. The fact that, what gets thrown into this discussion, what gets thrown into this debate is the fact that, we should actually look for employment. We should actually look for opportunities that, how can we actually create more employment? But we're not seeing that fundamentally from a structural attribute of this economic, the economy and the fiscus. South Africa is just not geared to create employment opportunities at all. It's just not. And let me qualify why I'm saying this. Now, if you go to other African countries specifically, if you look at, countries like Nigeria, Ghana, countries like Egypt, you will find that the actual economic construct is such that the basis of employment is created in informal markets or in the informal economy. And what that means is that it means that people have the opportunity there to actually initiate actions that will essentially make for employment, entrepreneurship, self-employment, services, the transactional basis of actually selling goods in that space. Now, the fundamental difference between us as a country and those specific countries is the fact that South Africa has got a completely different economic makeup, where 60% of the employment opportunities are actually created by private capital or the private sector. Now, I mean, that's insane. You've got 58 million people. We can argue and say about 38 million of those people are actually, of the age of, that makes them eligible for employment opportunities. Mm. How do we expect a very small private sector to actually create 60% of the employment opportunities in a country like ours? Mm. It's just not going to happen. One, because fundamentally, the primary motive of capital is not to actually create employment. The primary motive of capital is to actually do what? To actually take care of the bottom line, to make a profit. And that's why we actually find that when employment stands in the way of making that profit, we have, retrenchments en masse in this country. And we're no strangers to that because we've been subject to retrenchments for the longest time. What exacerbates this is the fact that we actually go into a world phenomenon, which is COVID-19, that really just turns things on its head completely. And proving again that we as a country were not ready at all, to actually take on, I think, a pandemic of this nature, but even more so to actually just revive an economy as a whole. Now, what COVID-19 does is that it actually then precipitates organizations to now start engaging more intensely in capital labor substitution. And what essentially happens is that now the whole, discussion around the digital, migration and digital transformation in organizations starts taking precedence. And finally, what the fourth industrial revolution really just ushers in is a discussion around whether, people will actually have jobs after the, digital transformation, after, companies and organizations start transforming. And that's where I think the penny drops for a lot of us. We start to realize that, yeah, this situation is quite intense. Are we actually going to really find ourselves in a position where we can actually create an economy around?
Hello? The volume went low. I think you covered it by something. I don't know.
Can you hear me now, Mamtim?
Yeah. Thank you.
So as the pandemic actually hits, the penny drops for a lot of South Africans to say that, whoa, we don't think that we have the potential or we have the actual capacity to come back from this. I mean, at the surface level, as you're actually looking at it, you're seeing an economy that was hit by a major phenomenon, and that economy was really just limping going into that phenomenon happening. And what this phenomenon does is that it exacerbates things. And now we're finding ourselves really dealing with issues around youth unemployment en masse, which weren't actually brought about by the pandemic, but was actually worsened by that. Now, taking it back to the economic construct of South Africa, I think that what we've really just done over the years is that we factored the ability for this country's economy to really be in the people's hands. And instead, what we've done is that we've actually given that ability to really just drive economic agendas to the private sector. I think that we've given that ability to drive an economic agenda, and really just factored it off to leadership that really is just not working for us. And really, I think that, tying it back to a lot of these discussions that we are having as young people, we're really at the point where we're really seeing leadership as the core alpha and omega of how we can actually just change things for the better. And that's the honest truth, Mamtembi. If you actually had to ask me about where the solution really lies, it really just ends and starts there with the basis of leadership. Who are our leaders? How are they leading us? What is the caliber of leadership that they're actually bringing about? Is this leadership actually just geared towards the people, or is this leadership actually geared towards, exclusive beneficiation of opportunities? And that's where we found ourselves, all of us, sick and tired of the situation, all of us actually sitting in a position where the illicit affair that's actually existed between the ruling party, government, and private sector is really just not bearing any fruits for us. And that is fundamentally what is at the core of the unemployment issues in this country. Yes, we can take it back to a discussion around the skills, and the caliber of skills, because everybody knows if you're driving an economic growth agenda, one of the critical, I think, turnkey sectors that you invest in is education. You really want to make sure that, you take a long-term view on that and say that, look, we want to actually grow this economy over a certain period of time. But in order for us to do that, we have to actually then take a long-term view of investing in education and the skills gaps that we've actually identified being, critical to the South African growth agenda. But again, I think that it's also kind of misinformed. I was actually reading the critical skills list, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, look, what is South Africa really trying to actually just gear itself up for as an economic strength? And that's something that I think has eluded us for the past 25, 28 years. We don't know what we want to do with this economy. We just don't. China took a 50-year outlook on actually reinventing itself and became the world's, mass producer / mega factory. You've got America, which is actually geared up to actually just run tech for the next 50 years, in actual fact. And this is just an intensity of focus and an intentionality of, how you're actually going to turn around an entire economy for the betterment of, the people that are actually living in it. And we don't know what we're trying to actually do with ours. We don't know at the core of our own, economic activity, what our strengths are and how we can actually export and sell those strengths to the world. And I think that that's something that really is worth a discussion. As a potential solution to turning around the unemployment crisis, what is our value proposition to the world as a country? Have we actually ever sat and discussed that, to say that, look, as South Africa, our value proposition is that we're actually going to be, a farming whatever for the world, or feed the world, or provide, processed minerals to the world. But we really don't have a handle on that. And I think that is really, again, at the core of what I just said. Really poor leadership. If we could improve the caliber of leadership in this country, if we could be deliberate about it, we would really start to be intentional about that. Now, you had actually asked, for me to actually pose and propose, in actual fact, solutions to some of these things. Now, I'm a tech entrepreneur in the informal space, in the formal market space, and you would actually be shocked. There's a lot of, again, misconceptions that actually have existed in that space for the longest time. For instance, the fact that now we're sitting in communities, Black Townships, actually speaking about how foreign nationals have actually taken over, the retail space. And we sit there and we actually want to have this conversation right now, which I personally feel that we're late for having. We're too late to that conversation. We're too late to that party. Foreign nationals have been in this country for over 15 years now. They've entrenched themselves in these communities. And whether there's some form of local unrest or not, they're not going anywhere. The market space is worth so much money that it just isn't sensible for them not to defend it. Now, this is where I think my particular work within Alexandra Township, for instance, one of the critical things that really came from our analysis in that space was really just being able to understand that, look, one, we're late for that party, but two, these guys actually do this retail front thing quite well. I mean, they're quite efficient in how they do it. And how are we ever going to compete at this point, being as late as we are? And we came up with a bit of a hypothesis on, how that space could potentially play out. And what we had then, kind of conjured up was the idea that, look, the foreign nationals have really taken over that space. What we need to do as Black communities, Black township communities, is to actually then choose a different space to play in. And one of our main critical points was to say that because they're actually at the retail front, why don't we actually take over distribution? Why can we not actually take previous Black South African owned spaza shops and turn them into micro distribution centers for 5 or 6 other foreign national spaza shops around that specific community? With the simple social contract to say to them that, look, guys, you're in our community, you're actually operating and you're working, and we have no problem with that. But in order for you to actually function, you would actually get your product from us. We run distribution, and they would actually run the retail front. Mm. Is that not a thesis that is explorable? Is that not even a thesis that's plausible?
Yeah,
I think it is. I think that's something that we've actually proven off the work that we did, running a bit of a distribution pipeline in the Alexandra space. It's a very radical idea, one that if you're not really ready to really talk about solutions, you wouldn't hear, because all that's actually getting discussed is the fact that, look, we want to actually take the space back. Guys, there's real room and reason to believe that we can exist symbiotically in that space. And my whole proposition on that is that why can former Black South Africans who had spaza shops not take over spaza shops, but take over distribution? And that for me is really just playing value chain dynamics at a higher level. You're saying that we're going to be smart about this. And the real reason why we can is because there's the notion that there's collective buying that's happening with foreign-owned spazas. That's not what's happening in that space. The real reason why foreign nationals have really just broken the market and broken the model is because what they've been able to do, I think quite instrumentally, is that they've been able to really defy the idea of buying power. And how they do that is that they chase the cheapest deal on the market on the day. So if, for instance, Macro has the cheapest deal, they'll not go to a specific wholesaler and go to Macro and buy out whatever they need to buy out in that space and just go back to their shops. And that's how it actually works. And that's what people don't actually understand about that particular market. And that's why, through the work that we've done, through the investigations that we've done, we've got some pretty radical ideas about how you can actually transform that space. Really just take back the township economy in that space. But the truth of the matter is that if I can tell you now, the biggest beneficiaries in that space are not foreign nationals. Let's not get it twisted. The biggest beneficiaries in that space have and always will be the corporate FMCG suppliers that are actually taking it. And it's a very, cash flow intensive space. So there's a lot of room to actually make your money directly and really just pretty much avoid paying tax on it. Because that's the real truth. That is the truth. That is the truth that we found out when we actually went to war with, well, not even war, it was just a bit of a butting heads with Tiger Brands in that space. I mean, they basically run a mafia organized, cartel there with bread in the township. How the hell are you going to actually, undercut those guys if the way they actually operate? You're not. Because every time you actually try and actually introduce a new product in that space, it becomes quite intense. Quite intense. To the extent where I myself actually got death threats because we were actually doing something in that space with bread. And that's the intensity of just how the township, informal market, corporate South Africa, and the whole spiel around unemployment and employment is really playing out. We don't really want to confront the idea that at the core of it, the core of the problem is how the country and the economy is actually structured, and it's who's benefiting. Guys, the underlying premise of every social injustice in the world is based on commerce. Now, I can even take it back to the slave trade and just how accidental that was. And that's what people don't understand, that it was a cruel thing, but it was accidental in the fact that you have a change in an economic, kind of pipeline that's happening in the Americas, where cheap labor is needed. And now what essentially happens is that you have English merchants who are actually just selling across the channel, who then decide that in between actually moving, goods from Africa to the English Channel and all the way across the Atlantic, that look, we might as well as actually just take some black people and go and actually offset them there. It really had nothing with the basis of hate. It's just that hate was commercialized, and now we found ourselves in the potential, displacement of over, 100 million people in the world. And that is the basis of how even just, xenophobia actually plays itself out. The premise of xenophobia has got nothing to do with a black on black, kind of resentment or any form of resentment of that notion. No, it's commerce. It's as simple as that. It's because you have the commercial resources in a specific community so pressurized and so scarce that the contest for them actually has to lead in a violent spark. It's the way it is. So that for me has been something that a lot of people really haven't been able to grapple with, because I think we sit down and we speak about, social issues from a surface level, really not wanting to tackle the fact that, behind all of it, behind issues around, GBV, for instance, behind issues around xenophobia, behind issues of racism, is the contest for commerce. It's the contest for commercial prospects that actually gets everybody so defensive, because if I lose, I don't eat. That is the natural order of things. That is just how commerce has actually pit us up against each other in the space, and that is why we're sitting in the position that we're sitting in now. Guys, if it was beneficial and really just if it just made commercial sense, don't you think that the government and all these corporate entities would have actually engaged in a very intensive, and really result-based employment drive, employment program? And yes, I know that there's the skills development, levy that's actually in existence. I know that, that's what some of these corporate companies are trying to do through ESD, but those are all facades. And the reason why they're facades is because they've really created very little impact to date. Very little. Very little impact. We've got unemployment numbers that are shooting out of this, it's just out of the stratosphere. You've got social injustice at its highest, in actual fact. You've got GBV doing God knows what in our communities, having our sisters and our mothers fearing for their lives. And at the core of all of it is just socio-economic inequality. It's commerce. It's it. That is it. If you have girl children who get empowered enough through education to actually go and contest some very, very lucrative opportunities in the market, employment market, business market, everywhere, you would not have the issues around GBV that we have. Because suddenly you would actually have, a population of women who are empowered, who are independent, who literally don't actually have to defend an abuser to actually just have a meal. Now, we can go back and forth about these issues. We can really just pivot around them as much as we possibly can. But the truth of the matter is that until we actually improve the actual socio-economic dynamic of this country, the socio-economic dynamic of Africa, until we actually go and really become very, very, very stubborn and unapologetic about the demands that we have with, every form of commercial partner that we take on in corporate South Africa, in corporate Africa, until we really just start, holding our leaders accountable, really drawing those conversations. And I've always believed this in the core of my soul because of the way I was raised. So the way I was raised was that I was raised by civil activists, right? So these are a group of people who, at the core of how we live and how we were raised, always had the premise that we have to be knowledgeable about our own civic rights. We have to know them, because how the hell are you going to be able to pick out when those rights are being violated? And that's one of the things that I think that South Africans really need to go back to the drawing board about. There's very low levels of accountability, because at the end of the day, and this is the honest truth of it, We don't know how to use the mechanism of accountability in this country. You know, whether it's through the Office of the National Prosecuting Authority, whether it's how you actually go and follow up on a specific, case you've reported. We just don't know. We don't know how to use those mechanisms, and that's why the bar has been set so low for all of these things to be violated and perpetrated against us. We need to go back to improving the level of civic knowledge that we actually have as South Africans. How do you become an active, Democrat in a democracy? We're not actively participating in this democracy. Instead, you actually have the story of two parallels, two separate states, where you actually have the haves and the have-nots. And at any given point in time, we kind of cross the line in terms of really being able to defy who are the haves and who are the have-nots, because we seem to think that we're still, in this euphoric South Africa where it's just beautiful for everybody, but it isn't. We have two separate states of development. That is just oh goodness, that's just what's happening. Go to any black township in this country, any black township. Now there's about 18 black townships in South Africa. The accumulated population size of those townships is actually accommodating over 70% of this country's population. But yet you look at the state of those facilities or those locations, you look at the state of just how people are living in that space. Look at the distance that they actually have to travel to get from where they stay to the economic opportunity that they want to antagonize. It's horrendous. It's shocking. Those are the things that for me need to change, Bamtembi. I think that having captured all of these, nuanced points, being as passionate as I am about it, I think that we also have to be quite sober. Let's stop BSing about it and really just speaking, around these issues, and really just identify the fact that at the core of it all is just commerce. If we can improve that particular conversation, we're done.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Thabiso. I'm actually having a whole lot of questions running through my mind. But one of the things that you said and stuck with me was the fact that as a country, and I believe in many African countries probably do the same thing, the value proposition to the world. That's why we end up crying every time whenever, there's a shutdown now for the traveling, because the only place we can go and buy goods to sell it will be probably overseas. The only time we think we need to visit would be probably overseas. Would you mind to unpack the dishonest side? Maybe I should indicate to the audience that the topic today that we are discussing is the general dishonest sense that we as Africans are on a wayward trajectory towards our promised land is actually a smokescreen. So I just wanted to get to a point where a person who's going to watch this video would say, now I understand what are the things that are not really clearly indicated to me. Then we can unpack all the other economic makeups and all the other unemployment, the motivation to make profit and so on. I just want you to, because not so many people are learned enough to understand all these things. So I believe you're going to be very helpful to unpack those.
Thanks, Bamtembi. I think that, like I said, and really just alluding to the dishonesty of a whole lot of these narratives, it's very clear. You just all have to actually just, reflect. I think most of us are black on this particular session. We just all have to reflect, right, on our upbringing, on where we're from, and also just reflect on, maybe perhaps where we're currently staying or actually working. It's there. It's palpable. You can actually see it on a day-to-day basis, and that's why I spoke about the parallel, that we actually live through, the separate states of development that we actually live through. Anecdotally, just taking it back to a time when I was actually in Cape Town with my little brother, we were actually at the Innovation Summit, and I recall so vividly that we actually took a walk from the CTICC where we were actually staying. There's a hotel there to the V&A, And he sat there and he actually just asked me, like, my man, like, I haven't seen a hobo or, a homeless person on the streets of Cape Town since we've been walking. We could literally just walk so freely in the city of Cape Town. And, that whole parallel that we actually lived through coming from Johannesburg, being born and raised here, you sit there and you actually sit and think to yourself that, whoa, what the hell is actually going on in this country? If I can have this experience in Cape Town and actually have a different experience in Johannesburg, and actually have a different experience as you actually go to a Cape Town township, what country am I actually living in? And the fallacy that's been created here is the fallacy that somehow, through, and I must be quite honest, the media has really been quite instrumental in really propositioning and positioning a false narrative around all of these initiatives that are actually happening. We could really just take it to, for instance, the COVID-19 relief funds. You know how ludicrous it was for me to actually have an entire relief fund that is dedicated to the informal space, where one of the preconditions of you being able to access it is to have financials. And I sit there and I think to myself that, wow, you financials, are you serious? And you find it even when you actually go into other examples of actually accessing higher education, for instance, the parallel that actually exists between, students who are actually coming from other institutions versus students who are actually going to predominantly white, prestigious institutions. Is that not the case? Is there not a separate state of existence in those spaces? There definitely is.
Let's talk about the part of financials, because that is, I think, the crux of the matter also, where we will be told there is funds available which small businesses can actually access. But the requirement is that these people must have a business plan. And the people who are actually, people that are actually supposed to be accessing the very same fund don't even have an idea on how to do a business plan. And now you're saying to access the money for the relief fund, you must have financials. What is it that we can do which government is not doing, because it's one of their responsibility, which government is not doing, that can assist in changing the approach towards making people being able to access this funding without having to go through that process?
I'm going to be quite honest with you. Having been subject of those processes myself with the NEF, with CIFA, it's just not going to happen. And the hard part about it is the fact that we have to really be quite honest with the level of institutional rot that actually exists within these departments, within these agencies. And these government DFAs.
Please unpack it, the rot.
Look, typically, right? So when we actually went through our own application processes, and this is something that I had a big fight with one of the heads of the NEF about. They made us wait 12 weeks just to actually process a response. Not even just give us an outcome, but process a response. Now, my simple argument here is that it doesn't matter at that point in time whether I had a business plan or really didn't have one. Doesn't matter, at which level of business acumen I have. If you're going to respond to me in a 12-week turnaround time, heck, we might as well as just close shop and just leave everything as it is.
That is
and that's the point that, and this is something that I've really held as a particular perspective for the longest time. Yes, we do need to actually start initiating this skills development around businesses and small business development at a more granular level. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, at which level you actually start initiating the transfer of these skills, because you still have to go and engage with the same agencies, the same departments, the same government, the same corporations that are just not going to see you as a viable prospect because you're Black.
So
that is the honest truth about it.
Will it be accurate to say, though there is resources for people to access, but the resources will be for the elite and those who have got access to, facilities that can assist them to do business plans and have financials, and be able to submit and wait for the very same 12 weeks, but still be able to survive.
Now that is true. That essentially would be, like a good kind of parallel to that argument. And hopefully that's something that I think that we could really start vying for, really just having those intermediary interventions that actually exist in between you actually waiting for that 12 weeks, and the skills that you're actually getting in between. But another thing that I really always it really just gets to me is the narrative that actually exists, that the level of entrepreneurial skills in this country, for instance, is really low. And that's a perspective that a lot of these international investors, international communities actually hold about us. Now, I was actually sharing with you before the call that before the session that I'm a part of a community called Daoist in Tech. And what we are is that we're a group of Black tech founders that actually came together, really realizing that no, something is wrong here. These people are not really taking us seriously. To access investment capital, to have those investment capital discussions is really so hard because of the mere fact that there is really no other explanation but for the mere fact that you're Black. And I'm going to really just call it what it is. Now, we've had these discussions, and we've been organizing ourselves to say that, look, there has to be at the core of us a way that we can collectively just move together, collectively antagonize spaces. And one of the core instruments of that group is to really start investigating what kind of interventions we could start taking for ourselves. So part of what I'm currently responsible for with a group of other, I think, father entrepreneurs, is to really investigate the prospect of us as 150 group strong, taking out some monthly contributions in the form of an investment stockful so that we can actually have our own investment fund. Now we're aiming to actually raise about 800,000 rands in the first round and start using that as the basis of actually initiating and engaging discussions with, higher level C-suite investors, and really just have those conversations. But that is just what we've been brought to because of our material conditions, because of how things are panning out on the ground, on the day-to-day. And I think that there is room for us to really start having those debates and those conversations and start organizing ourselves in that, form, to really have interventionary kind of, programs that actually exist between the 12 weeks of you getting funding, between you not actually being able to use a business plan. Besides, just again, off the cuff, a business plan is an old school thing. I mean, in our space, for instance, what we use a business model canvas, which is basically a single page where you get to model your business. But yet you go and you actually speak to the head of CEDA, for instance, and say that, look, this is what I have. I've got a business model canvas. This person is going to look at you and say, what is this? I mean, go back and do a business plan. And again, it's because of the caliber of people that are actually leading these institutions that is really making it potentially just impossible for the development agenda to really find expression. And that's essentially what I'm talking about when I speak about, the rot. Over and above that, everybody knows that, cadre deployment has seeped into all of these, particular DF development financing agencies. It's seeped into all of these government departments. It's seeped into all of these, government SOEs. So how do you actually go and really just want to, impose progress on people generally who are geared not to know how to actually just hack progress? They don't know how to hack it. They don't know how to make it happen. It's not going to happen.
I'm picking up the fact that the issue of skill, it's also affecting the very same institution that are supposed to assist the people who will, because as an entrepreneur, if you get funding, last week we were talking with Armande Kruger, who was indicating that if you are an entrepreneur and you get the funding, for instance, you hire 5 or 6 people, you have reduced a little bit of unemployment by those 5 people, and then another entrepreneur, so the story goes. But the system that you are currently explaining seem to be impeding that growth. Would you say that, like you spoke about the skills, would you say that the skills development within the country focuses on helping people to become employees, not necessarily employers? who are going to assist in reducing the 77 or 75% of unemployment? And what is it that we can do to improve that?
I think that you're absolutely right, and you know, you've basically summarized what is the actual gap around, you know, the potential threat around really turning around this economy. South Africa is really just, even the education system, Mamtemi, is geared to actually just really just deliver you into the employment you know, numbers, or really just deliver you into the labor market. Now, it's particularly problematic because what it means is that at any given point in time, your only expectation as a South African is to actually just go and find a job. After you graduate, that's just it.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that, you know, from a skills perspective, I think that we haven't actually engaged with entrepreneurship as in actual fact, in my opinion, the only solution for us, because of the mere fact that, you know, we're still really just stuck on a very old way of thinking, on a dogmatic way of thinking. And that's where we currently are. I think that the institutions of higher learning in South Africa have rendered themselves subject of, you know, their funders. And that's why it's particularly difficult to drive a very sincere and truthful agenda in those institutions themselves. You know, you do have, you know, I think varying experiences that you would actually have because of the mere fact that some institutions are better funded, better resourced, and just have a better network behind them. For instance, you can ask anybody this, and you actually, I think it's a KPMG who actually wrote a report about it. Just in general, the tech ecosystem in this country, right? Funding, hacking some of those networks is really reserved for UCT graduates. They actually, it's a thing in actual fact where you know that if you're not from UCT, you're going to really have a difficult time to actually just seep through those spaces. And the truth of the matter is why it's really just structured that way is because UCT is in Cape Town. Where's the actual, you know, tech ecosystem, or the center of the tech ecosystem in this country? It's in Cape Town. You know, how many foreign investors do you actually have living in this country, and where they're living? You've got a lot, and a lot of them are living where? In Cape Town. Yeah. And that's just the real truth of the experience, the parallel experiences that we'd actually have, because at the end of the day, we don't have a uniformed kind of way of approaching it as a country. Neither does higher institution have a uniformed way of approaching it, because they are responsive to their funders. They're responsive to that network. Now, if you want to go anywhere else in the, I mean, if you had to take, for instance, a student out of the University of Mpumalanga and really try and actually just impose them on you know, the capital that actually exists in venture capital in this country, you'd really have a hard time trying to sell that person.
Yeah.
That's just the honest truth.
That is true.
And this is why I think the skills gap becomes, I think, a real great conversation. What are we doing as a country to actually gear ourselves up to take over the entrepreneurial kind of, you know, wave? How are we actually embedding that in our education system? How are we actually embedding that in our curriculum? Are we teaching children that it's okay to actually go out and actually just, you know, solve problems? I was sitting in another entrepreneurial award ceremony the other day, and I was listening to this particular gentleman who's also a former government employee, but he's currently doing business with government and also other big players, really trying to actually hammer it into young entrepreneurs' minds that, you know what, we need to reduce the rate of failure of entrepreneurs in this country. And I sat there and I was just so confused and perplexed. I was like, are you insane? Why are we teaching people that failure is a bad thing? Why are we not actually teaching people to increase the rate of failure so that they can actually just get to the result faster, to refine that result and the sweet spot quicker? But we're not doing that. And it's because of the thinking, it's because of how systemic it is, how entrenched it is. And that's one of the things that we really need to actually improve on. I think over and above all, you know, having a reflection on the skills gap in this country, I think that we really need to identify, like I said, what our value proposition is to the world, and really align every form of skill now to really speak to that particular value proposition that we're selling to the world. And that's going to become our superpower. That's how we're going to actually now start turning around the economy. That's how we're actually going to start now really leveraging ourselves on the global stage. But when we really just speak about these particular challenges, I think that we really have to encompass the idea that at the end of the day, it all starts and ends with leadership. It has to really just be there.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Thabiso Mongane, and he's talking to us about the general dishonest sense that we as Africans are on a wayward trajectory, which is he is regarding it as a smokescreen. A topic that I picked up when there was a discussion on LinkedIn, and I thought it's something that we can have a discussion with. You are welcome to ask questions or to make comments. It's not like he knows it all. The idea is for us to engage and identify ideas on how we can improve on these issues. While we are still thinking or even wanting to press the hand to raise, I will still continue to talk to Thabiso. Thabiso, there's high unemployment. And before we started the session, we were talking about how that affects issues relating to gender-based violence. But the president of South Africa in some stage indicated that there are X number of investors who have made promises, but these promises are not coming to fruition, and we don't see people getting appointed. Instead, we're getting a lot more people losing their jobs, getting unemployed. What would be the problem? And what do you think it's something what is it that can be done to sort of improve on that? You can also speak to the approach that you are using as one of the solutions.
Mamtebe, I think I touched on that, really just mentioning and highlighting the fact that when investment comes into any space, it really comes through a commercial vehicle. It's the only way it can come through. Otherwise, it's a donation. And we must be quite clear about that, because I think that South Africans don't really just register with that idea that if you've got someone who's investing money, they want a return. And that return has to really just come in the form of, a commercial return, a profit, money. And one of the things that I think I touched on earlier on was really discussing this at length to say that private sector, corporate sector does not have the motive of actually creating employment. It never will. And that's why they can really just betray that particular, cause at will. And we've seen it. And I can dig a bit deeper into it to really just draw context to this. So in South Africa, we have what we call the Jobs Fund, right? Yeah. And the Jobs Fund's responsibility or its mandate is to really just, fund projects that are with NPOs and projects that are coming from private entities, so that they can actually create employment opportunities. So the true core of the mandate is so that these projects have to speak to creating employment. Oh, Mamtim, just go and actually have a look at who the beneficiaries of that particular jobs fund are. I know of a couple of big companies in this country that have raised hundreds of millions, and yet we're still in the debacle that we're in right now with zero jobs actually just spurring on the market. And that's just the legitimacy of this claim that I have to say that there's just a lot of BS. There's a lot of smoke screening. There's a lot of false narratives that are being told. The most recent intervention right now that we're speaking of is the Presidential Youth Employment Innovation Fund, where Cyril is trying to create jobs for young people. And he's really just basically going to use the jobs fund as a funnel to actually go and initiate those investments or those capital exchanges. But the truth of the matter is that it's not going to work. What really needs to be at the core of a high employment drive in this country really needs to center itself around what are our current strengths. One of our big strengths is really agriculture. How do we actually go and really just make a big investment in agricultural development? How do we incorporate tech and entrepreneurship into that space and really create a revolution around agricultural development? That's one of those. The second one has to be how we can actually revive industries. There was a real potential intention. I mean, there was a particular intention behind me speaking about our value proposition to the world. That intention was to really speak to this particular issue where, I mean, we know exactly how much, minerals we're actually just exporting to the world. We know exactly how much, raw materials we're actually just putting out there into the foreign markets. Why are we not processing that stuff? And I know it's a narrative that's been played out and been said over and over again, but we really need to look at our industries as a particular form of turning the tide and decentralizing the concentration of opportunities in those spaces. And what I mean by that is that we really need to create opportunities for smaller players to really meaningfully participate. If we still continue to actually give and factor off the responsibility to big corporates, to big corporate farmers, big corporate, manufacturers and big corporate companies, we're still going to find ourselves in this debacle. We need to take it back to the smallest players in the entire chain, in the entire value chain, and say that, look, guys, how can we actually use you to drive a hyper-localized agenda? How can we hyper-localize, consumption of these particular materials that are actually being processed? How can we actually hyper-localize manufacturing? How can we hyper-localize farming? And that for me is the real, solution behind how we can actually turn things around. And at the core of it also is to look to the informal market. How can we really empower informal market participants and actors to really participate at a high level and really be able to engage as much benefit out of the spaces that they're in, be able to actually initiate and engage and really just access financial services. And that is something that is really just at the core of how you actually turn things around from an economic standpoint. Like I said, we sit and we really talk about this as young people, man. Me and my collective and my own network of people, we discuss these issues rigorously. And that's why we actually have postured a bit of a hypothesis around how you can actually solve them. And for me, I think that those are the major three sectors that I think that you can actually turn things around right now. If you can incorporate informal retail into the formal space, if you can actually focus on the farming aspect of things, really just make sure that you create a lot of activity around that, and really look at your industry. How did you really reindustrialize some of our industries, textiles, all sorts of food manufacturing and all of that, and really bring it back to the smaller players. I think that at the core is how you actually turn things around, and I think that's what needs to actually happen. I can tell you now from the work that we're doing in the township, if we can raise the investment funds that we're trying to raise right now, effectively, we will be able to actually hire 50 young people tomorrow at a very low skill base, at a very low skill level, where we can actually now tomorrow employ 50 young people that would essentially be able to actually participate in the informal retail space, that would actually be able to engage in a skills development program that would really facilitate skills in IT, specifically, AI and computer code and programming, because that's the kind of business that we're actually building. We're building that kind of business. So that for us is just, the potential that really lies in this unique space that we're in the informal retail space. I think that is one particular ground that is so fertile right now that could create the immediate impact that we need. Every other space, in the farming space, in industry, would actually need a big capital outlay in terms of just infrastructure, which would be good, in terms of creating very short-term employment opportunities at this point in time. But for me right now, if you want to really create long-term employment opportunities, to relieve the current situation, I would really just take my money and put it in the informal retail space and just leverage technology to actually be able to do what, or actually extract the value that you potentially could get out of that space. So that's what I would do at this point in time, Tim.
Okay. You spoke about foreigners being good retailers, and the fact that it's something that probably as South Africans we have not really been taught to or to explore, or we are, but we don't really have money to do that. Maybe they come across as being good because they come as a collective like you guys are doing, and, you know, put money together and assist those who are still starting. So they don't have to go to the bank to start, to get the funds like we would do. They together, they put together money and they assist each other to start, and that makes them more stronger. And you said something profound, that we want them out. We want them to go, but they're not going because they see money, they see bread on their table. And you have found a way of making sure that they give back to the community by buying from the, you know, the locals or the South Africans. How did you go about doing that? And what is it that you can sort of advise other people that might want to, you know, use your business model to make sure that that assist them to create opportunities or even employment for those who are not employed?
I mean, at the core of our particular, you know, business is the problem that we're solving, or trying to solve, Mwamtembi. And I think that one thing that we realize is, and let me just again take you back to a bit of a story to just give you context in terms of how I found myself really understanding the space the way I do. So I spent about 3 months in an actual spaza shop out in Meadowlands in Soweto. It's not a spaza shop that I own. It's just someone that I approached and I said that, look, I really need to actually just understand this space. I'm going to spend every day coming to your spaza, really trying to actually gauge, you know, how you do things and just how the market flows. Now, Kabelo, in his particular, you know, situation is that he's actually surrounded by about 6 other foreign-owned spazas, and they've literally weakened his ability to really be competitive because obviously, you know, they get along much better than they would with him, even from a general sense of operations. So being in that space, I think that we really just came to understand, and really just putting myself in that position, I came to understand how foreign-owned spazas have actually just made or built a core business strength in the way they actually do their retailing. And for me, it was really quite clear that, you know, it is a turf war that's actually going on in that space, where you actually have one local-owned spaza, you would actually have 6 or 7 or 10 other foreign-owned spazas around them. And it became quite clear and evident to me to say that, look, this is a losing battle. It's to really want to compete on that level is not really going to happen. And I think that's what precipitated us to start investigating the other dynamic of the entire value chain, to look at how product moves on the market right up until it actually gets to the end consumer. And that's where we actually figured out that we would actually be able to kind of turn the corner. If we could position ourselves at a distribution level, we could essentially now start to really just be able to become the bridge between the major manufacturers and the foreign-owned spazas. And that's how we essentially just initiated ourselves on the market. It was a model that we were actually testing out to actually see whether there's enough grounds or legs on it so that we could actually run with it. And the major issues around that space, you know, outside of it being, you know, a high volumes, low margins game, is the mere fact that in order for you to really be able to extract value, you actually have to own up more and more and more of the value chain, in order for you to get to the point where you can become a Pick and Pay or a Tiger Brands, whatever. And that for me was the clear cut, you know, indication for me that, look, there's a big pie. Yeah, I mean, the pie is worth over 900 billion rands in terms of a market cap. So the market cap on the informal space in South Africa is just, you know, under 900 billion. Now there's a big pie, but all of these players are trying to fight each other at a very low level, at a local level, to actually just run the space. It doesn't make sense. Yet the space is entirely undisrupted and uninterrupted in terms of just the flow of product and the flow of money. Who is actually taking it? Who's actually getting the money out? And that's where we actually came to see, to say that, oh no, the people who are actually benefiting are, you know, the guys way up there in the top. So that really became the grounds for us to really just start forming a thesis around it, to say that, look, distribution, retail front, supply, manufacturing, break up the market into all of its, you know, smaller components, and really start saying that, look, what value really lies in a specific space, in what specific component. And that's where we really figured out that, look, distribution could become the turning point for Black townships to kind of really participate in the space again, more meaningfully. And the reason why is because now you would suddenly have an instance that Black South Africans can go and negotiate, greater relationships and greater business transactions with the white corporate South Africa or the white corporate FMCG manufacturers, and really just bring that value into the space by actually supplying the foreign-owned spazas. Now, we know that foreign-owned spazas, for instance, are really just stigmatized as really just having a lot of counterfeit, products and all of that. And if you have South Africans at the helm of distribution, you would finally be able to actually just turn that around, because the source of the products that would be actually on the market would be verifiable. You could actually go and trace them back to these manufacturers. And suddenly now you're beginning to clean up the market quite nicely, because the social contract that exists between foreign-owned spazas and the Black South African township distributors is that, look, you can't get your product outside of these four walls that exist in this township. It has to happen here. Now, Mamtemi, what you would essentially be able to do right on the spot once that is done is create employment opportunities already, because a foreign-owned spaza will actually be able to link 2 or 3, 4, 5 South African employment opportunities to a distribution center, which would then be able to link 10, 11, 12 employment opportunities that would be linked to what? To a logistics value chain between fetching product and actually delivering it. And the chain just goes on and on and on. And that's how you actually just created en masse. And these are things that we had to sit down, go and burn our fingers and actually go and posture in the market. It's something that you couldn't actually just sit and look at from an academic standpoint. You had to really get your hands dirty, and that's what we did. That's how we could actually come up with, I think, a very enriched definition and perspective around the township economy and how to turn it around. Just from the 120 spazas that we deal with, I mean, I was able to create 8 employment opportunities for Black South Africans that live in Alexandra. Wow. Very easily. And I've had these discussions with the foreign-owned nationals, and I've had discussions with some of their leaders. These guys want to be integrated into these communities. Heck, they're having children here in any case. They're having children in the very same communities that they're living in. So at the end of the day, 10, 15 years from now, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And that's one of the things that South Africans are really not hearing, because of the displacement theory that we have that's distracting us from really being able to be focal, and have this tunnel vision focal point for some of our issues. We're all over the show. It's not going to happen that these guys are just going to up and leave. They've got children here. They've got wives here. They've got, first generations are here. They're probably going to have second generations very soon. And that's just the honest truth about it. We have to be sensible about it and say that, look, there is grounds to really look at this entire space from a different perspective. They're here, they're doing it quite well. How do we support them so that they can actually just, catalyze and really just create exponential growth around what they do? They can't do it in any other community. A Somali is not going to open a spaza in Sandton City Mall. It's just not going to happen. The only place they have to operate, they're bound by that geographic element in their business that makes them have to just operate where they are in the town. Mamtem, I think you muted me, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was muting somebody else.
So we have to be smart about it. We have to be able to catalyze the impact. We have to be able to actually create exponential growth around what they do. And we have to actually choose a struggle in that entire war and say that, look, we're going to take over township distribution. There's no product that's going to come into the township if it's not coming through Mamtembi or Thabiso or Ambrose or someone else. You understand? And that's what actually has to happen.
I think you said something very, interesting, because most of the reason why the people in the township are fighting the foreign nationals is because they want to compete with them, right? And you said you went there and you realized you can't compete with them.
No.
How can we educate our people to realize that, and also to group them together and have, what do they call it? Is it corporate or cooperation?
Cooperative.
Yeah, cooperatives, yeah, to be able to work together and do exactly what you are doing, because that will actually even reduce the issues of xenophobia, issues of seeing the foreign nationals as taking their jobs, something that we were not taught to do. I mean, you give a child a packet of sweets to go and sell at school. The first thing will be, no, they won't buy. But you didn't try. So it's not in our DNA to be able to sell, something that probably we need to work towards. But how can we educate our township residents to do exactly what you are doing? Or create a platform where you can be able to educate them, or something that Thrift can also look at?
There's a lot of work, and there's a lot of my contemporaries and a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my co-entrepreneurs that are doing a lot of work to actually just drive these kind of programs. But my whole thing on it is that I think that there's we must just also be honest about it. Township residents and township consumers, they know this. They know that it's impossible to compete. If they didn't know it, then the ultimate resolution that they've taken wouldn't have been violence. And that's one of the things that I think we need to really be clear about. They know, we all know that it's impossible to compete. It's too late. But what I think is really frustrating the space at this point in time is a lot of the manipulation that exists around frustration that township people have around their situation, around being unemployed, around not being able to actually just attain upward social mobility. And I think that that's where we really need to actually concentrate our efforts in terms of really just teaching this particular narrative. I don't think that what we should be teaching is that, look, it's impossible to compete. I think that that's already been dealt with. I think that what we need to teach is that we need to teach Black township residents how to really start thinking in a very strategic way, in approaching some of their problems and the issues that they're actually facing. And the strategic element of it would really come from what can we, and really asking questions like, what can we actively do to really just be able to participate in this space? And I think that that's where we could actually start initiating the discussions. I mean, you have government agents and government actors that are actually starting to really just try and teach Black communities to form these cooperatives and go and actually antagonize the space. Like in KwaZulu-Natal, I think you have the provincial government that's actually got a program doing that work. But fundamentally, the problem of the day would be you're really trying to teach this business acumen, this strategic thinking, to people who really need to develop a common incentive as to why they should actually be behaving in a certain way together, attacking or really just approaching a situation collectively in a certain manner. And that's one of the things that I think that we're not able to actually hack as Black communities, that commonality of purpose and the commonality of intention and commonality of benefit. And that's what I think that would really be core to a program where you would actually try and really teach our Black communities to look at things at this particular angle. And what I mean by that is that, I mean, when you look at how white people in Jewish communities, white people in Afrikaner communities, Indians in their own communities actually form organizations that actually mushroom into commercial organizations, it really is off the back of really just preaching that particular narrative. We have the common incentive to actually make money, the common incentive to build a community, the common incentive to really just turn our whole socio-economic circumstances around. And that's what I think is really just lacking in all of these initiatives. And that's why they all fall apart. Because I don't think that there's anyone who's really been able to hack that particular discussion. Why is it beneficial for us as a community to really get together and go and really form an organization and form some form of commercial vehicle that's actually going to go and defend our interests? It's really, really difficult because of the mere fact that if you look at our communities, being different from the other communities, we don't necessarily have the money to actually get started and really just build these structures and really just build that kind of program. And that's where things kind of fall apart from the very beginning. I think the capital that really is required to really go out and actually contest some of these questions is really somewhere where we actually find ourselves not being able to actually just get up and running. And that is something that I think we actually need to correct. I think the government has a responsibility in actual fact to really just speak to that. How can they actually just fund us on our way to actually finding our feet? And we have examples of historically of where we've actually been able to answer that question. For instance, I always like to use the example of NAFCOC and how NAFCOC actually, managed to build African Bank by going to every household in Garankuwa and Soshanguve and actually getting them as members of NAFCOC to actually contribute on a month-on-month basis to getting a banking license. That's a story, an African story, South African story that people don't actually necessarily know.
Yeah.
We see African Bank today and we laud it as being some form of, white corporate entity, but that organization was started with the intention of actually defending, the financial agenda of Black people and Black communities by Black people. And that's an example of a success story of what you've just asked me, Mamten. How do we actually go and take this and teach it to people? It needs to be really aligned with a common purpose. That's what I think is just central to that. A common purpose, common benefit, common intention. That's it.
I like that. There's a comment on the chat. The person is saying that they would like to really, okay, my comment will be really around the breaking of international treaties that to a greater extent are upheld by Africans only. They continue to keep us in economic bondage. I would also love the presenter to really talk truth to power as it relates to leadership in our country. And then, are they arguing ahead to transform our life, or is it part of the smokescreen? Did you get that, or should I repeat?
Yeah, I got that. That is from Lerato Gambu. Gambu is a good friend of mine. He's also the former national spokesperson of the NYDA. You see, that's just the thing that I think we really need to be quite honest about. This whole notion of international treaties and how we're the only ones who are actually responsible for really just honoring them. I think at the main and in the main of this conversation, I think that we have to really just look at what has been happening in the world over the past, maybe 20, 25 years through globalization. We fumbled, and we fumbled because we had to subject ourselves to, again, sovereign credit ratings. We had to subject ourselves to really being able to hedge developmental programs against borrowing money off of foreign markets. Now, that on its own became a point of particular vulnerability towards any form of, independence that we would essentially have as Africans. And we need to understand that at the core of it all, the reason why we're the ones who are expected to uphold international treaties is because of our debt. You owe a debt to these Western countries. You really have to actually dance to a particular tune. And that's one thing that we need to actually start grappling with as Africans as a whole. Again, taking it back to what I said before, commerce. It's commerce. And the commercial aspect of why we're upholding treaties versus why, they don't have to honor them at all is because they are our creditors and we are their debtors. It's the way it works.
Mm.
So over and above the fact that yes, we would like to actually just reserve some form of independence and, start, having some form of fairness from the international world. The truth of the matter is that there really is no incentive for America, for France, for Germany, for, any foreign entity in the West to actually just give us that freedom. There isn't. Why do we think there is? We owe them money, guys. We owe them a lot of money.
So how do we bring in the Africa Continental Trade, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, if those ones are not necessarily going to be helpful to us?
Unfortunately enough, again, to having actually been close to the ground with youth politics, I've got a couple of my comrades who are actually involved in the African Free Trade Continental Agreement. I really find it particularly problematic at this point in time, because I think that the AfTCA really is, it's a powerful initiative that exists at a very high level right now. And I can qualify it by really asking a simple question. How many smallhold, retailers, manufacturers do you know of who are actually exporting their goods and services on the African diaspora?
Very few.
Precisely, because of just how, I think there was more pageantry. And again, taking it back to what I said in the beginning, there was more pageantry in having an Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement than there was thought on how you're actually going to initiate it. How you're actually going to really just make it palpable and put it in the hands of every small business in the continent. That is the particular challenge. Now, in between the AfTCA, you actually still have foreign interests that are actually just wheeling and dealing at will. Oh, it's powerful how these guys have managed to actually just, drive that insipid agenda to really take over commerce in the continent. And right now they're doing it through technology, through the tech ecosystem, through tech startups. And it's problematic. And let me tell you why, because the first thing that you're going to really engage yourself with when you actually look at that space, which is a space I'm quite involved in, is the idea that you're going to see these small tech companies that actually mushroom and become these mega, giants, or what we call unicorns. They've got over $1 billion US valuations, and there are these great African stories. But let me tell you what they don't tell you on the news. What they don't tell you on the news is that in order for you to get that kind of investment from an American VC, you have to go and incorporate in America. Now, what that means is it means that you're not going to get American dollars flowing out of America into an African company to build an African, city or an African country. You incorporate in America because that money has to stay in America, in America, in the United States of America. That's how it works. Now, when we actually speak about the issue around, honoring treaties, dishonoring treaties, the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, and how that is just a revolutionary kind of initiative to really bring, the prospect of lowering borders about doing business in Africa to the fold, it's all nonsense. It's nonsense because of the mere fact that we have to look at the underlying movements of money, the underlying, just character of how these agreements actually brought about. And the underlying factor of the matter is that if I'm taking money from someone, I owe them. And there's conditions that come with owing that person. And Africa is in debt to all of these Western countries, in perpetuity. We will forever be in debt to them because that's just the way the system has been set up. That's why Thomas Sankara was shot and killed, because he went and actually said to these foreign guys to say that we owe you, we don't have money to pay you, tough, deal with it, And that's just the honest truth that we need to grapple with, that in order for us to really be able to take over that agenda, our own, self-determination, we have to really look at that particular point of reality for ourselves, for what has actually happened in history and what is currently happening now. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa just went and got money from the IMF recently. He went and he got money. He got more money. What do we, and that's why I said to Mam Temi to say that, what do we think these investors are? We think that they're here for the betterment of South Africa. No, guys, we need to be quite sober about it. If I'm investing money in something, I want a return. I don't care who has to die for it. I just want to actually get my money out of it. That's it.
Profit.
That is the honest and blatant notion of investment dynamics, and just why we're finding ourselves having to honor these treaties. We're in debt, guys. It's just the long and short of it. We owe people money. The only way we can actually, get out of the situation is to pay them back, or really just give them, the middle finger and say, we're not paying you. But at the end of the day, both have consequences. Both of them have consequences. And we have to grapple with that. There is particular, light at the end of the tunnel. If you look at like the geopolitical dynamics that are actually unfolding in the world right now, Donald Trump, as bad as he was actually good for one particular thing. He got everybody to start focusing in on themselves, driving a nationalist agenda. And what that meant is that it meant that you had the world kind of preoccupied with itself, for that period of time, for that 10 years where Donald, or was it 10 or 5 years, but 10 years where Donald was around. Because everybody was just starting to actually say, look, we need to take care of our own people, our own interests, our own everything, right? That was for me one of the highlights of Donald Trump's presidency, why he was so pivotal to the new era that we're finding ourselves in. And I think that if COVID-19 would have been the same if Donald Trump didn't come before it. Now, that was the most powerful aspect of Donald Trump and his presidency, and how he kind of defied the globalization agenda to say that, look, screw globalization. We don't want to speak to anybody. We don't want to know anybody. We just want to just do what we have to do to actually just take care of ourselves. Everybody followed suit. Brexit happened, where Britain has basically just said that we just want to be on our own. You still have Europe still, who's really grappling with really just drawing all their members together, because there's threats of a mutiny that could potentially happen in Spain or Italy at this point in time. You still have the same issues that are happening in China, and how they're driving their own developmental agenda. But the fundamental crux of it is that in all of these individual agendas, Africa becomes the common denominator between all of them.
Why?
And that will never stop, because of the prospects that actually are on this continent. That's it.
Are you saying to me now that the president was, I think, yesterday in Ivory Coast, and they were talking about a whole lot of business deals and working together? I'm just looking at that and asking myself, there's been so much talks with the Kenyans and now the Ivory Coast. I think there's relations with SADC countries. Are they really yielding results, or is just papers that are existing and not necessarily adding value to the people within the very same countries where these people are leading and signing all these agreements?
Bamtembi, the funniest thing is that I think that question already, we kind of all know the answer to that question already. The first thing that happened is that South Africa's got the sincerity and the honesty to actually come to the world and say, hey, we've just found that there's another variant, Omicron. And the first thing that happens is to just basically discard us and say that, no, we're actually going to place travel restrictions or travel ban on those African countries. Now, that on its own is enough of an explanation, I think, for all of us here to actually just understand that we can really just shout at the top of our lungs all we want. The only thing that is going to really just happen is that we're just going to have to choose a better master out of China, out of America, out of Britain, out of Germany, out of whoever. That's just the what we've been reduced to. That is just the honest truth. And that's what's happening.
Colonized.
Let me say that again.
Does it mean that we are forever colonized?
I think that it's a tough one. We're talking about over 400 years here. We're talking about centuries on centuries of the same thing. I think that what would essentially just happen every time we try and actually just take back some of that power is that whoever's in leadership, whoever's charismatic enough, whoever's strong enough and courageous enough to do it will be removed. And I'm not saying this lightly. It's just that there's some things that I'm not going to share on this particular conversation that I know of, that I've been privy to actually know of. Maybe I'll share with you just on the sidebar on just how deep that espionage actually just moves, to actually just drive us further back. That's just the way it works. Part of it is just what's happening, for instance, out in Bangui in Central African Republic. You've got, the Wagner Group through Russia, which is a company of mercenaries that's actually just basically running operations in that space. You've still got them operating from Libya all the way from Syria. And if you actually follow it, really look at it quite clearly, there's a straight line that's actually just going through the Suez Canal out in that part of the region, right? And if you understand what's going on in that space, you know that what Russia is basically trying to do is that they're trying to position themselves so that they can actually neutralize the movement of oil. It's a very critical and lucrative oil route for Europe to actually get their oil. They're trying to actually just run that route. So if they run a route straight through the Suez Canal, through Libya, which is actually oil rich, they'll actually be able to really just plan, I think, a economically geographic coup in that space. Now, I mean, hearing these things, you sit there and you think to yourself, what the hell is going on? And the honest truth is there is no incentive for these guys to let us go and be free and live our lives. There's no incentive for them to actually just give us freedom and self-determination. Why would they? They stand to lose far more money than they would actually, just to actually keep us captive in some form. And that's my sense of it, and that's my kind of notion about it. You just have to be quite sensible about it and realize that, look, this is going to be a real dogfight here. It's not a debate. It isn't. It never will be.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Thabiso Mongane, who is talking to us about the general dishonest sense that we as Africans are on a wayward trajectory towards a promised land, which is considered a smokescreen. Do you have any question or any comment? I am actually blown away. I think this kind of conversation, Thabiso, makes one realize that and then when you listen to you realize you actually do not know. There's so much to learn. There's so much to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, any question, any comment? We don't want to close you outside. We can talk the whole day.
Yeah, I think I might have exhausted a lot of them. This was a bit of an information overload.
No, you shocked the crowd of them.
but I wanted to be abundantly clear that
it's actually quite appreciated. Let's talk about the fourth industrial revolution as the last one, the 4IR as they call it. I've seen a whole lot of small companies within our Pulukwane now, within our community, doing fiber, but most of them are not usually owned by Black people. And I ask myself, with the skills development that we're talking about and wanting to participate in this space, what is it that is being done to make sure that there are those who have got, the know-how to make sure that they participate in the space? Secondly, on the same question, on the same issue of 4IR, one lady in this platform indicated that when we talk about 4IR, it's actually sad because rural areas are not even at the fourth, they are still at the second industrial revolution. What is your view?
It's for me, the saddest thing about it is the fact that the fourth industrial revolution was meant to usher in a new era of opportunities, specifically for decentralizing market concentration. And what we're speaking about there is that all of these market monopolies, these market barriers to entry. Now, why it's sad for me, and it's kind of a bitter pill to swallow, is that the South African government, being the custodians of this agenda, was supposed to really drive it hard as a particular point to catalyze, some of their particular failures in the past. and catalyze the correction of those failures. But they didn't. They fumbled it dramatically because they did what they know how to do best, which is really factor the responsibility to drive these initiatives to, I think, corporate South Africa, and really try and actually use it as a point of leverage to start facilitating new corrupt deals that they could actually get out of it. I mean, we're looking at it from a perspective of, for instance, the rollout of spectrum and 5G. I mean, you have organized communities in the telecom space which have been fighting rigorously to actually have a fair opportunity to actually, go and bid and secure, the top tier spectrum that would essentially be, privy to the best opportunities, to the best South Africans, to the best businesses. Now, our government goes and does something unfathomable. Natural fact, it's not unfathomable because that's what they do all the time. Our government goes and they actually go and really just start segmenting the quality of the spectrum according to, certain groupings who have certain buying power. Now, what that meant is that it meant that your likes of Vodacom, your likes of MTN now, having the buying power and the balance sheet could actually buy the bulk of the top tier spectrum, which they can actually now start to hold the rest of South Africans at ransom for at a very high premium to actually then be able to enjoy. So it became quite, I think, symptomatic of the South African government and symptomatic of the situation that we actually live in when we actually speak about, the fourth industrial revolution. Again, you still have all sorts of relationships that exist between the government and foreign entities meant to actually just come and bring in those opportunities. And what really is particularly problematic for me is the fact that these companies, these corporate companies, want to really use this government-backed initiative as a point of actually driving some critical tick box exercises against, the ESD programs, ESD and skills development. And again, I like to actually use like very relevant examples to actually back this up. So you have, I think it's Goldman Sachs that actually just, came up with some 300 million rands for Township, whatever. Yeah. And we sit there and we think, oh my God, this is so great, Goldman Sachs, blah, blah, blah. They, the truth of the matter is that the reason why they're making that initial investment is because they know that they want to really be able to initiate fintech solutions to actually bank the unbanked in the township. So they want to really now use the 300 million as a way to buy into that market. And the government is going to guarantee it with them through the data sets that they're going to actually be giving back to them. And that's how they're actually going to build their business in that space. Now, we sit here and I can go on and on about all sorts of pear-shaped deals that have actually happened. I'm very fortunate to actually know some of them and how they actually gone and how they actually are done. It's just nonsense. The skills in the space are really just held back because of the mere fact that you really have a lot of great technology skills in this country, but to actually initiate, the dissemination of that information, the transfer of those skills, there needs to be some form of money that gets spent from government and corporate entities, and they're just not willing to spend it. They're just not. I mean, why should I actually spend on driving a women in AI initiative where we're going to teach young girls to actually, code and really just deal with deep machine learning and all of that stuff?
Yeah.
Why should we do that when in essence, we're really chasing profits at this point in time in the quarter, so we can actually have a better reporting quarter for our shareholders? And I mean, I can again still drop a name right now, a woman who's actually trying to do that, who's absolutely frustrated, Dr. Natalie Raffel. I mean, she's one of the board members of Women in AI in the World. She's frustrated. She's in this country trying to transfer those skills, trying to get the government and private entities to actually back her. But they basically just, I think, really just treat her with a lot of respite and, this tolerance to say, oh, yeah, you're here. It's great to have you here. You're just a big name in the AI space in the world. We're just not going to use you. We just don't, have the incentive to do it. And these are, again, people who are really, really, really critical to this 4IR agenda. But it's just not going to happen because we're not using them. I mean, this is someone who can actually sit down and start contemplating going back to Europe to actually go and sell her skills there. What's going to happen in that in that instance?
Yeah.
What would happen in that instance where you actually have one of the world's foremost experts in AI, who happens to be South African, who's here saying, I want to actually use my skills to actually just turn around the things that are happening in this country, and we're doing nothing with it.
Look, as you're saying that, I'm just being reminded of a session that we had about, from the aviation industry, people who are now losing jobs and are in the aviation industry. And these people, after that session, they emailed me and they were saying, we would want to come to the platform and talk about how we can assist government or whoever to educate the young people in the rural areas about aviation, because there is no skills and we are not getting so much support from the institutions that are supposed to support us. And the sad part, like you're saying, people who are having those skills end up, leaving the country, and we end up now having fewer people to deal with these things. Is there a way in which we can really improve and have a wayward trajectory?
I think that there is, in terms of looking at the fourth industrial revolution, for instance, I think universities, academic institutions are very critical to that agenda. I think, and this is something I've been quite passionate about, is really just lowering the point of access for township children to actually be able to really just engage with technological advancements. Who's the MEC of Education in Gauteng? The Sufi was really trying to actually do something quite groundbreaking in that space. But obviously, you just don't have enough people who understand, who want to actually back you, who are actually going to really just catalyze your impact. And I think that's where these institutions of higher learning could really play a hand. We really need to really open these institutions to the general public, to the communities that they actually serve, or the communities that they actually lie in, to actually be able to drive this agenda of transferring these skills. And I don't understand why we're not using them at all. I mean, you have faculties of technology and science in these institutions that should be driving this communal work down to the ground, making sure that there is a transfer of skills. Now, they've already got a pipeline of funding. Let's talk about how to actually expand, the funding funnel, so that they can actually get more funding to actually drive these programs. But it's not happening. And that, for me, I think, is the lowest point of departure, or the lowest point of turnaround when it comes to this particular problem. Go back to these institutions, open them up and say that, look, you guys are going to serve as that bridge. You have the resources, you have the actual, expertise. Now you're going to transfer them. And that relationship needs to exist in tandem with the local, what's this, basic education department.
Let me interrupt you there. There's a guy I watched a video of who was talking to some 90 Minutes in Africa, and he was talking about Cameroon. And the concern was that there are so many people with PhDs in different types of fields, but these people cannot necessarily do the actual work. So they can teach, but in terms of transferring the skills, as you're saying, becomes now a problem. And he was saying this is an African problem. I'm looking at our country now as South Africa. There are so many people who have got MBAs, who have got PhDs in, you name them. But when you look at fields where these people are supposed to add value towards, it's actually in shambles. Transport is going down the drains. SOEs are in, and people who are sitting in those boards are probably having PhDs. Then we start wondering, skills development, is it really about qualifications, or actually the doing, the action, the actual doing of the work? Or are people hiring you, like, for instance, as an example, I'm just giving an example. hiring Thabiso to write the thesis for them, and then they get the PhD. You know?
Is that actually happening?
There are allegations of those kind of things taking place where people will buy or pay specific people, and even foreigners, those will be paid to do those kind of things. Then they come and they have the qualification and they get hired. But when it comes to delivering, that's where we now have to balance issues of having the qualification, which is now the big driver within the South African government. You must have qualifications, but they don't have experience on how to do these things. And this guy was saying some have qualifications, chemical engineering or something, and they can't even, manufacture a grenade. They can't even manufacture a weapon. We go overseas and buy. But Africa has got people that are educated, but we are not there in terms of doing the work. And you are saying these universities must go to the villages or to the rural areas or to the township and transfer skills. Which skills? Because they sit in class and they read a book. And in some cases, there are allegations that there are professors who let the students do the research for them, and then they produce the papers. They say, yeah, this is your homework. You must research on this topic, and the next thing that is really refined. And yeah, we see this every now and then. I've had people who call me in my institution, we do research. People will call, can you give us don't you have research on this and that? No, I don't. I'm busy with my PhD. I wanted to, So how do we transfer skills in that kind of a situation where you will write for me, I submit, and I graduate?
I think the funny part about it is that just in the process that you explained, you write for me, I submit, there's a transfer of skills already happening there. Already there's a transfer of skills happening there. And I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to this, which is something I've heard for the first time. I think to myself that, wow, there's actually a market for such things. There's actually an economic market for people who actually write people's theses. Like what a business we could actually come up with there. Hey, like that's just the general notion that I'm thinking about now. Like that's a real opportunity. But look, I think that you're right. And like we've been discussing over the past hour and a half, it's evident in the level of change and impact that really has been happening in this country, that is probably the case. That is probably what you're describing is probably what is actually happening on the ground. I think that, this is going to be something we're going to really have to take a bit of a long-term outlook on, really just turning around the situation. I think in this current state that we're in, it becomes very difficult to actually go and initiate these kind of things, because you still have to figure out who's truthfully themselves in the space, and who's being true about who they are. And that's a very difficult thing to kind of pinpoint with the plethora of challenges that we currently already have. So I think that at this point in time, the only thing we would be able to do is really just go out there, initiate the work with the universities, and kind of just monitor the situation as we go along. There's no real answer in terms of how to actually curb that, outside of just being able to really just take a long-term outlook on turning around the situation. It's been 25 grueling years of I think degenerate, I can't even say progress. It's not even progress. It's the degeneration, of really just reverse movement or backwards movement. And it's a very difficult thing to actually grapple with at this time, because I think for every one of us, we're starting to actually take note of the fact that it is as bad as it really is. The situation that you just described for me is I couldn't actually just imagine that that's actually a thing that's happening, but you described it so fluently. It's almost as if something you've actually seen or witnessed yourself, which is something that for me was quite a bit of a dampener, man. It's a bit of a saddening thing. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking to myself, yo, I thought we had problems, and just on top of the problems that we've been discussing for the past 1.5 hours, we seemingly have another one, which is now seeping through our higher education institutions. And again, like I'm saying, for now, I don't think that there's anything much that we could potentially just do to curb that now. I think we just have to take a long-term view on how to actually now start measuring aptitude with, actual skills. And that's what we would actually have to start engaging in terms of turning around the higher education, system as it is currently. How are you actually measuring the aptitude and the actual skills? Is the current system actually effective in doing that? Is writing an exam or writing a paper enough to actually measure whether I can actually do something that I'm actually, set to be qualified in doing? So, and that also, I think, speaks to academic institutions and the vocations. We really need to actually look at that. How do we actually revive, the vocational programs of these academic institutions? We need to actually get people who are qualified to actually sit in those spaces, but people who have actually gone and had their fair share of battles. They've earned their stripes in battle, and I think you're taking it back to what I said again. Part of the insights that we got from the township, we would not have gotten if we didn't actually go to war. And that's what makes my perspective on the township economy much more enriched than a lot of people. That's why I can stand up vehemently and disagree with a lot of BS that's actually been put out into the space, into media platforms. You say that, but that's nonsense. I've been there, I actually do this on a day-to-day basis. I know exactly what goes on in that space.
But you
can't tell me about it because I actually live.
That's what I was saying, that people will sit behind a computer and they will write nice reports. Google, there's this incident of Eastern Cape where they copied a report or some policy from Australia or something like that, and they presented it as is, plagiarism, which is something that went into newspapers, but nobody get punished for that. Not that they should, but it's just an indication of people not really understanding what's going on the ground like you would. Can I please, before you sum up, there's a lot of comments by TBG. I'll allow you to raise them yourself because reading them will take quite some time, if you don't mind. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Yes, TBG, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, and can you hear me?
Yes,
yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for this presentation, discussion. And, as you were talking, so many things were coming into my head, and I've just come, as you were indicating the challenges that we are having, the limitations that we have as a country and as a continent in general, I realized that for as long as we still owe the West money, there is nothing we can do. We can equip ourselves with skills. We can try to give us to update us with the latest, like the 4IRs and all that. But we will never truly benefit from all the work that we are doing. In my comment, I was saying that I've read somewhere that China, I'm not sure which year did they settle their debts to Europe, but they had a 99-year-old debt which needed to settle. So the emperor at the time when they came, I think they were like something like 50 years left. They've made a long-term plan that we need to settle this debt. Wait for 99 years and then we take over. So whoever came after the other, they knew what the long-term goal was. Hence, China was able to take back their economy and do whatever they want in order to uplift themselves. So in my comment, I was just saying that until we reach to a place wherein as South Africa or Africa, we decide. I know the challenges come with the minute you want to take food out of the West mouth, they will find a way to discredit you in some form. But until we take such brave decisions, we will continue to talk about skills development. We know that skills are being developed, even though it might not be enough, but those developments are not benefiting us as a country per se, because as you rightfully indicated, we say we develop them into going into the market and look for job, which job is not there because the piece of a pie is so small. So until our leadership, or as people, we are strong enough to make that bold decision that whatever we owe to the international world needs to be paid, irrespective of how long it takes. We will continue to be talking, to be having these discussions, coming up with ideas on how to develop ourselves, our children and all that. But we will not really get the large piece of a pie. We will just contribute into that pie which already exists. So basically that's what I was saying. And one other thing that I'm very passionate about is, in order for us to get to that hard decision, to make that hard decision, is for us to be able to identify ourselves, to know that we as Africans, what is it that we want? Who are we and what do we want? And until we get to that, we will be able to make hard decisions like that. So yeah, basically that's what I was saying in my comments. Thank you.
Yes, what value proposition are we taking to the world? That is quite interesting. Look, we can talk, I think, for the next 3 hours and we won't be able to get to the end. But I think the idea is to make everybody aware of what is currently going on, and for you to be able to take specific decisions and make your mark within the community and make a difference, no matter how small it might be, towards improving our lives. Because I think 77% of unemployed people, that's just the term ticking bomb. What do you think, hey Thabiso?
We know that it's a bomb. We know that it's a question of not, if anymore, but when, it's going to explode. Young people in this country are very impatient and are growing increasingly impatient with the current status quo. And this is just not something that is unique to South Africa, Mam Tembi. This is actually a situation that is really just, taking precedence all over the world. And I mean, even in Europe, you have big youth movement that's actually just mushrooming. In Spain, for instance, where you actually have, the Catalans who actually want independence from the Spanish government as a whole. We've seen it in Tunisia, we've seen it in Nigeria, we've seen it, most recently here in this country in July. But we might think that must have not had much to do with the youth, but it was the young people who were actually running rampant, looting and doing all of those things.
Yeah,
it was young people. And the youth movement for social change, the youth movement that is saying that the world leadership is inadequate, it's incompetent, it is just not going to work out for us if we continue to subscribe to it, is growing increasingly fast on a daily basis. And I am saying that this 77% that we're dealing with in this country is going to be the start of something that I don't think any of us are prepared for, because we are really just directed and really just lined up on a day-to-day basis to just basically forget what's happening around us and our reality, because of the aspirations that we have, because of just the vast differences that the media will actually put out there in terms of your social mobility aspirations versus your current reality. And that's what we think, and in actual fact, that's what they think is really just going to set us apart, so that we can't actually start organizing. But I'm telling you now, we're doing it. Yeah. We're meeting on a frequent basis. We're talking more and more. We're engaging the biggest critical question that young people are trying to actually grapple with now is that if there should be some form of pushback, revolutionary pushback, revolt, anarchy, whatever, that it needs to be led on in a very organized premise, in a very organized way, by an ideological principle. And now we're trying to identify what that ideological principle is. Really having had the examples of not believing, communism anymore as a solution. We've really suffered under the free market system with capitalism. And now we're saying that we really need to carve out an agenda for ourselves. And it's happening, Mam Tembi. We're talking, we're meeting, we're engaging, we're organizing, and more of us are actually just becoming fed up with the situation. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day, and I had called him and I told him point blank, something really triggered me. And I told him, I was like, I'm tired, I'm fed up. Like, this cannot happen any longer. We need to actually, get together and meet. And that's what we've been doing. Collectively as young people, I know that I've kind of started a little, activist platform called We the Youth. And we're trying to basically just bring in young, sharp minds to the table and say to them that, look, guys, help us to actually posture the solutions. And it's happening. So that 77% that is being neglected, that's being purported as being some form of, afterthought on the news headlines, it's going to really backfire. And this is something that I want to be quoted having said really, really, really rigorously. It's going to blow up in this country's face. Trust me. It needs to change. It needs to change tomorrow. And I'm one of those people who's calling blatantly for an overhaul in the leadership of this country. I don't want to retain anybody who's currently in leadership positions, who's led us down this path. I don't believe that I've got anything to say that is fundamentally progressive to them, because I have seen and I've experienced fundamentally how they've shortchanged and betrayed everything that has ever been said that is progressive about this country, everything that has ever been said that was meant to actually turn this country around. And I don't think that we should actually be having conversations with these people at all. I think that, the least that we could potentially do is just allow them to lead out the rest of their lives in peace and not really just take them into court and prosecute them for their crimes, because that is essentially where we're at right now. And people think that, it's a bit of an extreme perspective, but it's the truth. You failed us, you've benefited from failing us, and yet you sit here and you want us to actually still entertain and engage you and your perspective about how you could actually potentially lead us forward. You have no right to do that.
What for me is actually sad is seeing the sort of recycling of those who are for now supposed to be on retirement. I always say to my colleagues and even like my friends that having older people within a workspace actually blocks innovation. And if it does, then they stay for a period until 65. How do you then expect younger people to come in and change things around? Even in leadership, I think it's almost the same thing. If you look at those who are in leadership, I think there are very few people who are in their 30s or even their 20s, very, very few. Then what you ask yourself, okay, when they die, is then that they will be considered, when do they coach and mentor these people that are younger to become leaders with them in those leadership positions? So I really get your point. I think
Sir Ramaphosa is 73 years old. Like, I don't care who says what. I don't care what kind of a nice man he is, or just his level of experience in business and in industry. A 73-year-old has no business trying to actually dictate the future. It's not possible. At the older you become, your activism, your passion is watered down by literally your material conditions. You've got children, you have to start thinking about them. And that's why old people are just not geared to change any situation. It's just the way it is. It's just a psychological process that actually just ensues once you reach a certain point in your life. You're going to reach a point where your thinking is going to be geared around, when I die, what do I leave these children? not South Africa's children, but your children. And that's the way it is. And it's understandable. That's why we're saying that, look, we cannot continue to engage each other on this debate of whether young people, old people. It's very simple. You're old. You cannot be dictating a future that you're not going to exist in. Move aside and give us guidance. Move aside and actually come in and advise us on how to actually handle certain decisions from an experiential standpoint. You've got the experience. You've been in the battles, so you can advise me on the decision making. You can advise me on making the right decision and just give me some form of reflective space for me to kind of weigh out, the outcomes. But you can't come and actually now start posturing ideas about the future. It doesn't work.
Which you won't be there. Okay, neither of us know that you'll be there at what stage.
And that's why you're seeing that the current government, that's why you're seeing corporate leadership in South Africa, which is really just taking so long to transform, because at the end of the day, you're speaking to people who are sitting there and saying, look, I've got no real incentive to transform anything. I won't be there to participate and enjoy the transformation. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to mind my own business and try and actually take care of my own interests. It's the way it has been for the past 25 years. And that's,
would you say that are we really transforming as a continent and as a country?
No, we're not. We must be very clear and distinctive about looking at motion, right? And progress. Yeah. Are we making a lot of motion? Yes, we are. There's a lot of motion and commotion on the African continent in this country. There's a lot of it. But is there progress? No, there isn't. How do you know this is? Because Africans have been displaced and are continuously being displaced from their home countries, from their own continent. How is that a progressive measure at all? At all. We're being displaced. We're being displaced by the situations in our own home countries. You've got South Africa housing the largest population of Zimbabweans out of Zimbabwe right now because of the mere fact that it's just not transforming quick enough. You've got Botswana, which is, yes, telling a good story about, how there's moral authority and order and governance, but Botswana is predominantly a rural country. Predominantly, it still is. If you're outside of Gaborone, the only development that you could potentially see would be where in potentially Francistown, which is still, again, a very rural place.
And so is Namibia. So, the list goes on. Yeah.
The list goes on. We can go on. I can go on the whole night with all of these 56 states that we have on this continent and really just be able to detail some motion, yes, but really be able to show you that there is very little progress that's actually gone on in these countries at all. At all.
Thank you so very much for having graced us with your presence. I believe this won't be the last time, Thabiso. We've already spoken about that. You are my adopted younger brother from now on.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I think that I'm a young, very passionate, very aggressive, individual about the issues that we've been discussing, because I think me and I think a lot of other young people have an appreciation of the fact that we don't have time anymore. We don't have time to be, talking about it at length. We don't have time to be negotiating for it. We don't have time to actually be, playing pleasantries about it. No, the only thing we have time to do is act. The only thing we have time to do is change things. And it's happening, ladies and gents. That much I want to reassure you. As much as it might not be happening on the grand stage or on the main stage of, all of these, or the arena of all of these issues, but it's happening. We're doing it. We will actually grow incrementally to actually go and contesting these issues on a grander stage. It's going to come. It's just a matter of when, but we're working.
Thank you so very much. I believe everybody who's going to watch this video is going to be educated. I think it's a huge eye-opener. Sometimes we need to remove those, spectacles, the sunglasses, and see clearly as to where we are going. it's all good and well to sing praises and to, to go and vote, but we need to also look at how things are improving, because it's going to affect our children one way or the other, and our great grandchildren. So thank you so very much for this time, and I just want to ask you in a few seconds to just sum up and say your closing remarks.
Oh, my parting shot is, again, I think to thank you, Mamtemi, for being sincere and intentional enough to actually have a platform like this for us to actually come in and really just, I think, share our perspective on things and really defend some of our views. At, you know what? At the end of the day, the only thing that really needs to happen is for us to really be reawakened to our potential as Africans, as South Africans, to actually just drive the change agenda. I think that we've been disempowered for so long that we've actually made it a part of who we are. And that's not just even just a white and black thing, but that really has been even just, from how we were brought up. Your voice matters, man. Our voice matters. What you feel, what you dream, what you intend on your life, it matters. You shouldn't have to live in a country where it's deemed insignificant because you don't have proximity to the right people or the right circles, or you don't have proximity to money. And that for me is that the saddest part about being a South African. The fact that you don't have these things in your arsenal, when you don't have proximity to them, you are compromised to the greatest extent. We're saying that we're going to change this. We're saying that we're fighting hard every day as young people, an entire generation that is reawakened to these issues and really has accepted the fact that maybe we won't actually ever get to live in the South Africa that we've all dreamt of. But maybe what we can do is that we can actually die trying to actually bring it to fruition. And that is something that I think we're starting to engage in. And again, I just want to say this outright. Things will change.
Yeah.
They will change. Not all hope is lost. We're working hard. We're intentional. We're aware. People of my age and my generation, we like to say we're woke. That's what we are. We're woke, and we're literally driving this agenda every day, looking for ways to actually just break free of the holds of poverty, break free of the holds of servitude, and all of these things that have been put on our lives from the day that you were born. I think it's so painful that it's just by virtue of being born as a black person on this continent,
Right.
you are deliberately thrust into challenges that have got nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
That you've got very minimal control over. And that for me is the saddest part of this particular conversation. We really have to drive a very hard bargain in terms of demanding that should change.
Yeah.
We have never had a more opportune time in the world's history to really be having this discussion. Never.
Yeah.
We'll never have another opportunity like this again. And that much I want to be upfront about, because again, everybody in the world is starting to discuss these issues. The Black Lives Matter movement in the States is starting to give us more boldness about being able to discuss it, to say that it's not fair, it's not right, it's unjust. We have to be able to really be comfortable enough to live our lives and live out our lives without having to actually be fearful of how we'd actually turn out. The anxiety that you have as a black person on this continent about your future is sometimes insurmountable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that for me is one of the greatest crises that we're dealing with. That particular thing, that being born black is your biggest sin. That is it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. This was Thabiso Mongane from Thrift, the Afrofuturist. I can't remember what's the other title that how to pronounce it.
Big believer in Daoism.
Yeah,
and Confucianism. Yeah, philosophers. We're young philosophers. We believe in it.
But thank you so very much for having made time. And this was Are We Transforming? To everybody who made time, those who connected and those who disconnected, and those who are going to watch. I think this is one thing we would want to share with everybody that you know, so that we can get to understand where we are and also how we can improve as a country and also as a continent. This is Thembegile Felicia Makubele, and thank you very much for having tuned in. We thank you for this time, and we can build the Africa that we want to live in, and that we all want. Thank you so much, and have a very good night. Thank you.